So my name is Jackowski. I am the Director of Inpatient Behavioral Health and Social Services, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a credentialed alcohol and substance abuse counselor.
So you are coming to us from the front lines.
From the hospital.
Great. So welcome, everybody. Glad you guys could join us today. My name is Dr. Alison Byers. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and my background is actually in forensics and trauma. And I am an executive coach, and I was also a 9/11 responder. So I worked on a number of these issues in the wake of 9/11, working with first responders and supporting their families as our first responders then were doing such amazing work. So I'm excited to be here today. We have some exciting things to talk about.
Yes, I agree. It's very exciting to be here, and I think it's wonderful to be able to present to the community and to accept any questions that anyone has from the community.
Absolutely. So we do have the chat function. So we're going to encourage all of our listeners to please use the chat function and type in your questions. We will be monitoring those, and we will get to as many as we can, probably at the end of the presentation. So thank you very much for everyone who's joining us. And I guess with that, we will get started. All right, there we go. Let's see here. Terrific. Okay, so I guess to just start with some of the basics, let's talk a little bit about what a crisis is. We use that term a lot, but what it technically means is really for any individual who might perceive or experience that a particular event or a situation is intolerable to them individually and exceeds their current coping mechanisms. So that may change with time. Certain situations can be perceived by one person as a crisis and not by another. So a crisis is more than simple everyday stress, but it is a far cry from mental illness. And it is typically a normal reaction to an abnormal event. That's really key, really important. And it is unique to each individual, but absolutely everybody is affected by a pandemic in some way, whether it's directly or through their loved ones, family and friends. So, yes.
I think, your point regarding how it's the perception of each individual, how collectively, and certainly in a pandemic, collectively we're all experiencing crisis and some form of trauma, but every person's experience is unique to themselves and their process is unique.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. So there are all kinds of different responses that people have. Some are productive, some are not productive, and they change, they shift. So different kinds of responses, emotional responses, things that people are feeling internally that others may not be aware of, not always observable, apathy, anger, fear. There's obviously behavioral responses, which could be good or bad. Sleeping excessively or not enough, drinking excessively, hoarding. So that was some of the cleaning supplies in the beginning of this pandemic. Some people have been volunteering to try to cope with their own feelings, try to be helpful. Binging on news. Some people are taking advantage of working at home and exercising, really trying to get themselves into shape and really control some of their stress that way. There are also spiritual responses that people are having, both positive and negative. Some turning to faith to soothe themselves and to find a way to get through this. Other people are experiencing a loss of faith and questioning some of their principles. So physical responses, some people may be feeling particularly fatigued. Some people may be feeling irritable. Need for exercise, need for getting outdoors, fresh air can be really, really beneficial. And then cognitive. This is something that a lot of people are surprised by. A lot of individuals are experiencing trouble concentrating, finding that for some reason it's not as easy to think clearly, and people don't expect that from themselves. They don't understand why. Some people also have the disbelief, and are trying to find a way to wrap their minds around the scale and the scope of what's going on with a global pandemic. And then obviously denial. So all kinds of different cognitive responses, and I think we'll touch on that again as we go forward. So great. Okay, so there's a wide range of reactions that I've seen, and I think that that's completely normal. Most of the people that are going through this are actually going to cope very effectively, growing stronger, despite the fact that potentially an initial response could be a little bit overwhelming. But with time, natural resilience does typically support recovery and growth. For some people, however, they will survive, but they may use poor coping mechanisms. And what may happen is that either in the short term or even in the longer term, people may find that there's more problems down the line. Sure that you're seeing some of that with substance use and abuse, with an increase in drinking, increase in possibly taking sleeping pills. People are not sleeping well.
Yeah, so we are definitely seeing an increase in people who have either been sober or clean for some time and are now the stress and the issues regarding with their employment and even just being sick is causing an increase in relapse and substance abuse right now.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm sure that there are other individuals who may not have ever been in recovery but are finding themselves now with either more stress or just more time on their hands, living in close quarters. Tensions are high amongst family members. And so I think that there's a lot of people that are experiencing an increase in either overeating, over drinking, all of these coping mechanisms.
These are some of the things that we see, and also when there is a crisis or there is, in this case, a pandemic, is that we are replacing one public health crisis with another. So we have a public health crisis of addiction and mental health, and then the pandemic comes in and it kind of moves that off to the side, but that public health crisis has not gone away.
Absolutely.
So people who are currently or were experiencing all of those things prior to this, now that's just become so much greater for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that's, the last note on this slide we're talking about. There are a few people who will not be able to cope, despite the fact that there exist some formal supports, often because of these pre-existing conditions or really extreme proximity to the events, or given the economic implications, there are a number of people that are experiencing kind of secondary stresses. And for those few individuals, there may be significant need for long-term mental health support.
Yes.
So, okay. All right. So there are certain factors that make a medical pandemic different than other kinds of crises that the nation has faced. So one of the things that's kind of fascinating is because there is no clear beginning or end, we're watching the entire world fluctuate. Everyone's watching their numbers and people are concerned. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? That uncertainty in and of itself is unusual to a medical pandemic, and that's causing problems for other people. So there is also a lack of accurate, consistent, and complete information. A lot of people are news hoarding, which in and of itself can have detrimental consequences for people that are really binging. It's also impossible to know exactly who is affected and how it manifests. It's not like a tornado or a natural disaster, Hurricane Katrina, etc. There's a vagueness about this that is actually increasing people's anxiety. Uncertainty in and of itself is problematic, And in this situation where our own personal health is at stake, and we have these new normals with masks and distancing and waving jazz hands, all of these factors are contributing to the not knowing, to the strangeness, to the newness of this disorder. The usual forms of respite and rejuvenation are not available. So for people who used to enjoy going out to dinner on a Friday night with friends, that might have been a coping mechanism. And we've now taken away many of these coping mechanisms while simultaneously increasing everybody's stress level. So that, for many, many people, this medical side of things is so frightening. There's also grief over loss of planned events. Everyone's going through this now with graduations. I know that I have friends that have canceled weddings, postponed it for a year, and other people are seeing normal, typical life events like having a baby that are creating incredible stress and trauma. So the other factor is, given the fact that this is global, there's just an absolute inability to get away from reminders. It is everywhere. So some people who like to self-soothe by distracting, very, very hard to do in this particular climate. Absolutely. So, okay. So as we talk about essential workers, there are some very unique factors that our essential workers are up against. So when we're talking about essential workers, there's such a range. We obviously have our healthcare practitioners. We have the people on the front line in the medical world, but we also have everybody that's working in grocery stores. We have people who are making sure that our cell phones are working, that we have telecommunications up and running. So we have a number of essential workers who have sometimes voluntarily, sometimes not voluntarily, continued to work during this pandemic. And some of those people had a choice in the matter. Some of those people didn't have a choice in the matter. They actually had to be there. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the exposure to the mass scale of illness and death. So even our medical workers, who typically understand that loss of life is an unavoidable part of the job. However, nobody was ready for the mass scale of what was going on. And I know here in the greater New York area, it was so incredibly intense. Certainly Suffolk County got hit so early and so hard that just the scale for many people was problematic. And then for all of those people that are out there whose job every single day is to save lives and help people, the recognition that there's an inability to save lives despite the superhuman effort that people put in. And that is going to have long-term consequences for those individuals who see themselves as healers, as caretakers, right?
Yes.
Then there's this added pressure on the part of our essential workers to be an emotional support to isolated patients, to colleagues. The incredible hours that people were putting in, when we look at our first responders and the people on the front line, they were seeing need everywhere they turned, particularly from isolated patients that couldn't actually be with their loved ones in times of great stress. So many of these individuals do see themselves in each patient, and they see each family member's pain, and that's really tough.
Yeah, I think that being a nurse working with patients who were very, very sick and patients that were isolated, and being that person who is with the patient when the family cannot be with the patient. So there was a kind of a shared isolation. So the worker themselves were feeling isolated because they were separated from their families sometimes, and then also to then witness a patient who is dying or very, very ill who is also isolated. So there's that kind of a shared isolation and the connection that they were able to make with their patients, but the emotional toll that takes on them.
And yes. I'm concerned that those the implications of what you're describing are going to be felt for a very long time from our frontline workers.
Yes, yes, because it brings up, a lot about abandonment trauma.
Absolutely.
And so there's that aloneness, that sense of being left that people experience and the fears that come with that as well.
Absolutely.
So those are things that will be long-term effects.
Absolutely. And then to compound matters, I think that given the fact that because of a desire to protect their own family, their own loved ones, that again, there was an alienation from their own family, from their own friends out of a desire to protect those people and the need to not bring more infection back into the workplace. So they were having a very different experience than their loved ones. So for the people who were in the hospital every single day, as opposed to people who couldn't go to work, and this concept of quote unquote working from home and the stresses that that brought, compared with the incredible stresses and the trauma for our first responders and our frontline workers. And having those different experiences when everybody else is trapped at home creates a disconnect between people. It's hard to understand just what you're going through.
Yes.
So then obviously the burnout. A lot of these people it was constant. I know that here at the hospital we had major staffing issues, had to bring in additional support so that we could just meet the need. And so then that need to care for colleagues, trying to take care of yourself, incredible toll that our first responders are taking. And of course, now that things may have calmed down a little bit, as you and I know, it's oftentimes after the height of the event that people start to experience some of their strongest mental health issues. Once you actually have a chance to breathe.
Yes, that the veil comes down, right? The ability to kind of protect ourselves comes down. We're more vulnerable and more open to the emotional response.
So the additional challenges for those people that are on the front line, we're looking at their very realistic fears and worries about infection, both for themselves and for their families. Guilt over possibly affecting loved ones or for caring for non-family members over their own family members when they go to work and they do their jobs so valiantly. And then the media has played such an enormous role in all of this. So the media was stressing the need to stay home when all of our essential workers had to go to work. So there's a conflict there that other people could be, quote unquote, compliant with Governor Cuomo and do as they were told and stay home. And yet these individuals were actually every day going to work and doing what they need to do. There's a little bit of a psychological disconnect when you have to behave that way. So, and I think that there was a lot of anxiety and anger in the early days over the lack of protective equipment and not understanding exactly what was needed, what would keep them safe, how many they needed. So I think a lot of that uncertainty and fear and anxiety played out repeatedly. So, and then I guess the other thing that people may not know is actually wearing masks actually reduces your oxygen intake. And so people find themselves being more tired, and that you actually have about a 10% decrease in your oxygen intake when wearing a mask. So when you think about how hard people were working, think about first responders and nurses on the front line that are moving patients, exerting themselves, rushing from bedside to bedside, and the fact is you're actually getting less oxygen at a time that you're already fatigued, worn out, not sleeping, probably not eating well. So many people don't know that as you wear the masks, that there actually are physical limitations that you're experiencing. So how to be supportive to your loved ones. So I think that part of our goal today was to talk to some of the family members of those first responders and recognizing the unique position that they are in. So I guess the very first thing that I want to say, just like on an airplane when they say, put your own mask on first, right? We're all going to have new meanings to the word mask, right? For the rest of our lives. The stronger that you are from taking care of yourself, the more you will be able to help your loved ones. Just can't stress that enough. And at the same time, you're also modeling good habits for them at the same time. I think the second thing is listening skills. Everyone thinks that they're good listeners, right? But as we know from professional training as listeners, active listening is a different kind of a skill where you're really withholding judgment. And the goal is truly to try to just understand, not even problem solve, but truly listen, understand, be patient, reflect back, repeat back what you're hearing, which really proves and demonstrates that you heard what somebody was saying. Make sure that what they were communicating is what you were listening to, not getting distracted.
One of the important things, I think, in being present for another person, a family member, a client, or anyone, is to really understand the saying I learned in social work school was, bear witness to my pain.
Yeah.
So to have someone that is willing to sit with you, listen, pay attention, hear what the person is saying, again, as you said, Alison, without judgment and without really trying to figure it out, I understand you. Just be present.
Yeah, oftentimes
Listen.
people jump to an attempt to solve the problem,
Yes,
right?
Yes, yeah.
And it's very different to just listen and share somebody's pain. You try to minimize their pain by carrying a little bit of their burden for them and with them,
Yes.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
And again, it's so different for us. We're trained in that as professional listeners, right?
Yes.
And that's not what everybody does, right? And then I think that we have to recognize oftentimes that people who are on the front lines are on the front lines for a reason. And they see themselves as caregivers, as givers in general. And it's a particular personality type. It's an individual. I mean, it takes a really strong human being to run into the fire when everybody else is running away, right? So I think that for those individuals specifically, their family members may recognize in them sort of an inability to take. They don't like being on the receiving end. They don't want to see themselves as weak. And sometimes they may see themselves as less strong if they admit that they have a need, that there's any kind of a crack in the veneer. And for their loved ones, it may be really, really tough to help them to understand that they can be wonderful frontline responders and vulnerable. It's not something that first responders do well. Vulnerability. They do strength, right?
Right, absolutely.
So positive coping strategies. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in what the problem is, right? So what do you do about it when we have all these stresses that we're up against right now? So number one, I'm going to say it, cut yourself some slack. We are hard on ourselves. And I think that particularly for individuals who have a desire to be helpful, oftentimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. One of the things we were chatting earlier about the cognitive challenges that we're having. And I think that, interestingly, I just read a great article and they were talking about the fact that we've lost some of the benchmarks. So we used to have a commute. At the end of the day, you could leave the office, get in the car, drive home. You had a little bit of a decompression time, right? Now we don't have that. You get up from your desk at the dining room and you walk 3 feet and you're in the kitchen. And whoop, well, there's my commute. I'm ready to go cook dinner now, right? And so the simple fact that we don't have some of those decompression times. I was chatting with a friend of mine who's actually in Philadelphia, and he started to leave his building. He would go downstairs and just walk around the block. So close the computer, downstairs, walk around the block, and that was his commute home. And he found that it was just a way to transition. We don't have those transitions, which gave us oftentimes benchmarks during the week. So whether you celebrate with a spiritual community on a Saturday or on a Sunday, those things allow us to have habits and traditions that make us not need to think about what we are doing. Even if that's just going to the beach to walk your dog on Sunday mornings and enjoy the sunrise, right? a lot of those things have been taken away from us. So that concept of Friday night, end of week, doesn't mean anything anymore, right? Friday, Saturday, Monday, Sunday, doesn't mean anything. We're all home, right? So that adds some sort of cognitive pressure, I think.
And I think your point is so well taken, is that ritual is so helpful with all of us, and all of us helping us to feel better about things. You know, people who have a ritual of attending church every Sunday, that has been changed. So they have to look at how they can change that ritual so that they can continue to worship, but the feeling is different. The feeling of being with the community as the Friday night, and even the driving home, you know, the ritual of maybe stopping and getting a cup of coffee after work. So all of those things have been taken away, and it's important to try to take a step back and say, okay, what was it about that experience that I liked? How can I try to incorporate something similar into my life?
Absolutely, which was my friend who decided to actually commute around the block, because that gave him that time to just decompress before he went home.
Yes.
It's great. It's great. So again, I'm going to say it again, cut yourself some slack. All right. That's a really key one. And that's what you're talking about, formalizing some time for some of the activities that you love. So literally put it on your calendar, build it in. If these are activities like listening to music or drawing or writing or running, make sure that you schedule those really, really well. And then don't let them slide. I mean, really important. And then the other thing I really want to touch on is limiting exposure to the media. You know, a little bit of information can be really helpful, but information overload, you know, it really can backfire. And I know that I've got some friends that are kind of going down the rabbit hole when it comes to seeking information. And there's conflicting accounts out there. Some's more reliable, some is more up to date. Be strategic. Find out what it is that you're really listening for, get the info, and get out.
And as being a family member of someone that is working as a frontline worker or a first responder, understanding that your family member is in it all day long. So they are in crisis mode all day long. So when they come home from work, after, if you've been home all day and you want to watch the news, continuing that for your family member may be really difficult. So when they get home, maybe changing the channel to, you know, a nature program or something funny. Or maybe even turning off the TV and just having music on when they get home, so they don't have to move from one sense of chaos and pain into another where they then have to say, hey, could you please turn that off because it's too much for me.
And having that dialogue very directly. It's a real honor to be able to support your loved one in that way and have a conversation, ask directly, what would be the nicest thing? Would you like some time outside? Or would it be nice to have some music? Or maybe you need some alone time, maybe just a few minutes to decompress. So allowing yourselves that space to have that conversation and ask directly how you can be supportive. It's great point. So again, just continuing with coping mechanisms, because there are things that we can all do for self-care. I really want to talk about breathing. You know, there's so much out there right now about meditation and mindfulness, and I really can't stress enough. I use it in my practice. When I'm teaching, I actually have my students start some of our supervisions, doing a little bit of just a 1-minute mindfulness exercise. And you know, the proven physiological benefits of taking the time to breathe. I think it's fascinating that the body cannot physically be both stressed and calm at the same time. And breathing is what lets us go from stressed to calm. And it's such a simple thing. We can do it anywhere. It goes with us no matter where we are. And there's some really great apps that are out there right now. And I think that most of the companies are doing free giveaways. So like Calm, Headspace, Breathe. I know that there's a million out there. And just taking a minute or two to just think about your breathing and empty your mind. Really think about the air going in and out of your nose and your mouth and your lungs. So simple, so portable. It's a really great coping skill, right?
The Calm app also is now, there's a Calm channel on Sirius. So for people that do have to commute, to be able to put that on, if you're listening to the radio, just listening to that music to help to bring you down and to focus more on your breath.
That's great. That's great. So I would also say, and this goes back to what you were touching on, finding spaces that are not focused on the crisis. So really encouraging people to find topics and subjects and places that are really crisis and pandemic free. Such an important thing for us to do. Think about cooking, think about crafts, think about movies, think about the things that we miss the most in our strange pandemic life right now, and really focus on those things. That's really important. And the other thing, again, as a psychologist, I want people to be empowered by focusing on what is actually changeable. What is it that you can control? We are all feeling so out of control in so many different ways. However, there are things that we can control. We control, I wear my pedometer. How many steps did I take today? I control that. That's 100% my power, my superpower. And focusing on that can allow us to feel so much better.
Yes.
And then, the other thing, setting realistic goals. I know that I had this sense when I realized I was going to be working from home. It's like, okay, great, I'm going to run a 5K at the end of this, right? Okay, well, guess what? That's not happening, okay? However, I promised to myself was that I will eat a healthy salad every single day. And I have been able to stick with that. I absolutely have. I might be eating a cookie after it, but yes, I am still eating that salad every day. So I want us each to set really, really achievable goals, because there's nothing worse than feeling like we've set the bar too high and failed. That's just not going to help us in any way.
Yeah. It defeats the gains that were made. So if we set a goal that is way out there, then we are going to, and we fail, then we have stressed ourselves again.
Absolutely. And then we did it to ourselves,
yes.
Right? Uh-huh. So now I'm putting up our resources page, and this is just super important. I actually want to give a special shout out to the New York State Office of Mental Health, because a lot of the information that we've provided today has come from various different lectures and presentations that they've put out. And there is a helpline that is out there. It is staffed by professionals who are trained. And so this number, I want everyone to feel free. Repost this. This is actually turning into a national hotline. Really interesting. New York State has done such a great job with this that other states have started to emulate the line that is being run here. And while they get their systems up and running to support their states, we are actually working nationally. So this hotline is staffed 7 days a week, and I really want to encourage everyone to promote that. And then on the OMH New York website, they have some really interesting resources that are also translated into Spanish for our Spanish-speaking community. And all of those things can be disseminated. Really, the goal here is get the word out and make sure that we provide as much support and awareness and as many resources as we possibly can in these really challenging times. So let's see. I don't know that we've had any questions that have come in yet, but I just wanted to really thank you, Janet, for coming today. And I think that this conversation is so important. We have so much more work that we're going to need to do in the coming months, but it was really terrific to have a chance to have a dialogue with you.
Thank you, and I feel the same, Alison. Thank you so much, and I hope that this continues. I hope that the community can feel free to reach out, and certainly to reach out to the OMH website and call any of the other, call the hospital, there are people there, but to feel free to start talking and sharing what's happening with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good.
Thank you.
Well, I think absent any questions, that wraps it up for us. It was terrific spending the afternoon with you.
You too.
All right.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks so much.